The Subcommittee on East Asia and the Pacific and the Subcommittee on South and Central Asia will come to order. This joint hearing will assess the current situation in Burma, including the upcoming sham elections, the dire humanitarian situation facing the Rohingya community, and ways to address the proliferation of scam centers and fentanyl hurting the lives of everyday Americans. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Welcome to today's joint East Asia and the Pacific and South and Central Asia Subcommittee hearing on the ongoing military and humanitarian crisis in Burma, titled No Exit Strategy, Burma's Endless Crisis and America's Limited Options. This hearing aims to illuminate a prominent source of regional instability and a significant foreign policy opportunity for the United States. Burma is a failed state, rapidly becoming the world center of organized crime, with more than half of its population living in poverty, nearly 3.6 million people internally displaced, and millions more having fled to neighboring countries. Although resistance forces have achieved notable successes over the past year and a half, the junta remains resilient, still controlling about 20% of the country's land, while opposition forces control roughly twice that amount. Since Burma's military coup in 2021, the junta has only worked to further legitimize itself, despite some claims that it is in decline. The Tatmadaw, Burma's military junta, is slated to hold sham elections in December 2025, where the results are predetermined in a bid to disguise authoritarian control as democratic process. These elections are designed to create an illusion of legitimacy while allowing the junta to continue serving as a proxy for China and Russia. Both powers have aided the Tatmadaw's numerous war crimes by propping up the regime with weapons and surveillance technology. The United States has a moral obligation to call out and act against both human rights abuses and autocratic transgression. While cuts to foreign assistance have reduced our ability to assist in disasters and in the conflict writ large, the conflict presents an opportunity for the United States to strengthen its regional interests in regard to supply chain security, economic partnerships, and critical mineral initiatives. This hearing also addresses the direct and immediate consequences of Burma's conflict on the American people. Make no mistake, America's interests in this conflict are not humanitarian alone. Junta-affiliated scamming networks operating within Burma have targeted Americans, stealing billions of dollars a year from American taxpayers. These funds not only benefit transnational criminal networks, but continue to line the pockets of the military junta. Congress must act immediately to protect our citizens' hard-earned savings. Burma's humanitarian catastrophe is its strategic importance in Southeast Asia and the ongoing war's harmful effects on everyday Americans all demand a thorough reevaluation of the United States policy. Indeed, when we consider both the domestic and foreign policy implications of the crisis in Burma, greater American attention to the conflict and its outcome truly puts America first. To address these challenges, the committee has gathered an excellent panel of witnesses who will help us further unpack the many dimensions of Burma's conflict. So I look forward to engaging with them on this critical issue. Thank you. I now recognize Ranking Member Ami Berov to make his 5 minutes opening remarks.
Thank you, Chairwoman Kim and Chairman Huizinga and Ranking Member Kamala for hosting a hearing on this important topic. And I want to thank the witnesses for joining us today. We're grateful for your expertise, and I look forward to your testimony. I won't reiterate everything that the chairwoman said, but I agree with everything that you did say in terms of the complexity of this conflict, and the ongoing is, there's no easy solution here. Um, you pointed out the importance of calling out these sham elections that are coming up. These are not legitimate, free and fair elections. These are elections where the junta is trying to legitimize themselves. We have to make sure we call out the elections for what they are. Also, you talked about the scam centers that are preying upon U.S. citizens, but also are funding the military junta. That is a real challenge as well, and it's something that not just the United States, but it is impacting Southeast Asia and other ASEAN nations. This is an area where we should be working closely together to try to disrupt these organized crime networks and scam centers. The other thing that I'd like to touch on also is what we see in terms of the PRC supporting some of the junta, providing military aid and others. This is an area where we should use the full power of Congress, Democrats and Republicans, to continue to put pressure on the Chinese and others, including bringing in the Indians who also are, seeing the cross-border refugee crisis, to work together to try to find an end. And lastly, from the beginning of the conflict in 2021, we've worked closely with the ASEAN nations, the Southeast Asian nations. I recently met with the Indonesian ambassador, welcoming the new ambassador here. We did talk about next steps in how we can support ASEAN to find a resolution to this. And it's not just a resolution. We've seen the resilience of the Burmese people in terms of fighting for their liberty and freedom and a path forward. It's been remarkable that they've been able to sustain this for this long. This is an opportunity to try to facilitate real change where we can empower the people of Burma to find their path forward. It will not be easy. It will take partnership with the other Southeast Asian nations. It'll take ASEAN leadership, and then the other partner neighboring nations that have a real stake here, Bangladesh, India, and others. So again, thank you for this timely hearing. I think it is important. This is an incredibly complicated and complex challenge, but this is also an opportunity if we work together with like-valued allies, with the ASEAN nations. Hopefully we can effect a more positive outcome down the road and in the future. So thank you, Chairwoman Kim, and I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from South and Central Asia Subcommittee, gentleman from Michigan, Representative Huizenga, for your opening statement.
Well, thanks, Chair Kim, and I'm thrilled to be able to do this this hearing with you and to pull in the folks from South Central Asia Committee, as well as your vital committee. And interestingly enough, yesterday I met with the quite new ambassador from Bangladesh. And my goal with that meeting was to first and foremost say thank you for what Bangladesh is doing in Cox's Bazar. The number is now, he informs me, 1.3 million Rohingya that are there. They have about 35,000 births per year, and still an approximately 100,000 refugees coming across per year. And so there is certainly a strain on whether it's Bangladesh, and as my friend Ami Bera had mentioned, India as well, and others in that region who are helping. Madam Chair, I've mentioned many times before in this committee, our Foreign Affairs Committee, as well as the Financial Services Committee, where I'm Vice Chair, that the Burma issues are near and dear to my heart, as well as the heart of my constituency, especially those constituents at the Battle Creek Burma Center in Southwest Michigan. That is what prompted me to really take a much more focused look at what is going on. And year after year, I've heard their stories and their desire for an end to the violence perpetuated by the junta, and they want to promote an open and inclusive democratic system and return to a safe and stable and secure Burma. And I know that's the goal of a few of our guests that are here in the audience with us today. And without objection, Madam Chair, I'd like to submit for the record a letter addressed to this committee from more than 90 civil society organizations regarding the situation in Burma. They write in their letter, it went to both the House Foreign Affairs Committee as well as the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, quote, "Burma's military has always been and remains today the single greatest source of instability and economic destruction in the country," close quote. Sadly, I think those words ring very true. And unfortunately, since February 2021, when a military coup replaced the democratically elected government in Burma, these desires for a new Burma are a long way from being fully realized. Protests and general strikes from pro-democracy advocates led the military regime's indiscriminate crackdown, including the killing of protesters and previously elected leaders, and airstrikes against schools, IDP camps, and civilian infrastructure, all of which manifests into human rights violations perpetuated by the oppressive and illegitimate military regime. The civil war between the military junta and the ethnic resistance organizations rages on, wreaking havoc across the country. And thanks to unfettered arms supply line from Russia and China, the military regime controls the airspace. And just last week, the military junta took delivery of Russian helicopters and Chinese military aircraft, which will ultimately be used to fight resistance forces and civilians in the mountainous regions of the country. The junta's grasp on its territory has become so desperate, the junta activated mandatory conscription last year, forcibly recruiting Rohingya Muslims to fight on the regime's behalf or to use them as human shields, even as the regime has long persecuted the Rohingya themselves. In the junta's latest ploy to build legitimacy around their illegitimate regime, a first-of-its-kind election has been called for December 28 of this year, 2025. As co-chair of the Congressional Burma Caucus, I have significant concerns about the lack of electoral rules and structures in this deeply flawed process. Additionally, the enactment of a recent July 2025 election protection law targets anyone who speaks out or protests against the election and threatens years of imprisonment or even death for those that are convicted. This move only further chills the democratic process in Burma. To say that these elections are shaping up to be free or fair is delusional. Moving forward, the United States' strong voice and stalwart leadership could have a lasting impact on the region. I've frankly been encouraged by the Trump administration's interest in the region, including multiple rounds of sanctions designated from Treasury targeting Burmese armed groups with links to scam compounds and a Burmese arms procurement network linked to North Korea. Additionally, since October, this administration has pledged over $130 million for the Rohingya refugee crisis and pushed 11 countries to increase their aid response to the Rohingya by more than 10%. In terms of assistance, the United States has provided more than a third of all aid to the Rohingya Humanitarian Crisis Joint Response Plan in 2025, more than double that of any nation. I see my time is running out. But I just want to add again, I'm encouraged to see the July 2025 Quad Summit joint statement on bringing much-needed international attention to the Burma crisis. More can and should be done by this administration and our global partners to stop the bleeding in Burma. So I look forward to our conversation today, and with that, I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize the ranking member of South and Central Asia Subcommittee, my dear friend from California, Representative Sidney Kamlegal-Dove.
Well, thank you, Madam and Mr. Chair, for bringing us together for this joint bipartisan hearing so we can speak with one voice on this important topic. The conflict in Burma reverberates far beyond its borders, and I want to focus especially on the instability it creates in South Asia. The largest refugee encampment in the world is in Bangladesh, home to a forgotten crisis, the 1.5 million Rohingya refugees who fled ethnic cleansing at the hands of the Burmese military junta in what the United States determined to be a genocide in 2022. For the Rohingya, Rakhine State in Burma is their motherland and their home. But for decades, they have been treated as outsiders in their own land, targeted by the military, maligned by other Burmese ethnic minorities, and stripped of their citizenship. The Rohingya are now the world's largest stateless population, a status passed down from one generation to the next. Years after renewed ethnic cleansing and the outbreak of civil war, the Rohingya in Burma are still the large target of brutal genocidal violence. The Arakan Army, an ethnic armed organization that resumed fighting the military junta in late 23, has massacred the Rohingya in territory under its control. This has forced an additional 150,000 Rohingya to seek safety in Bangladesh in the past 18 months alone. In Cox's Bazar, however, the Rohingya confront another harrowing set of challenges. Bangladesh, which faces major strains on its state capacity, has demonstrated incredible generosity in hosting the Rohingya refugees, a responsibility that must be shouldered by the entire international community. And while we all share the same goal for the Rohingya to live safely as equal citizens in their home country, policies to ensure that the refugee camps remain a temporary solution have in many ways had the opposite effect. Instead, it has deprived the Rohingya of their agency to build a life for themselves and end their reliance on government and international support. The Rohingya do not have the right to work or the freedom of movement to leave the camps. They have limited access to any livelihood or educational opportunities, depriving them of the right to human development. They are not permitted to build permanent structures, resulting in vulnerability to flooding, landslides, and fires, and constant costly rebuilding. Insecurity in the camps has exploded as armed groups battle for dominance and traffic young Rohingya into prostitution, slavery, or conscription in the Burmese military. Women and girls are disproportionately impacted, as always, with an uptick in gender-based violence and child marriages as conditions deteriorate. The Rohingya crisis requires sustained U.S. leadership to support the Bangladesh government, ensure robust assistance and improvements to the humanitarian response, and to find permanent solutions for many of the Rohingya. Alleviating the pressure on Bangladesh's limited state capacity is essential to promoting stability in the country, as the interim government works to rebuild from past authoritarian rule and manage its political transition ahead of elections next year. While I was glad to see the administration announce new funding pledges to support Rohingya refugees, the $168 million the administration provided in fiscal year 25 is less than half of the $354.5 million the United States provided in 24, even as humanitarian needs arise. Such a significant funding cut will directly impact the lives of Rohingya, whose food rations amount to about $12 a day. The U.S. must also work with the Bangladesh government and our partners in the region to improve conditions for the Rohingya, both within the camps and to find sustainable solutions outside the camps. This, first and foremost, requires a cohesive regional strategy that goes beyond a singular focus on tariffing our partners or pursuing a Nobel Peace Prize. Resettling Rohingya refugees to safe third countries is an essential part of this effort. If the State Department is engaging other countries to accept U.S. deportation flights, they should also be working with partners to resettle stranded refugees into a long-term solution. With newly confirmed leadership in the South and Central Asia Bureau, I hope to see sustained diplomatic engagement and resource prioritization for the Rohingya refugee crisis. And I am ready to work with the administration on a bipartisan basis to push for sustained solutions for the Rohingya, especially as Bangladesh elects a new government early next year. I look forward to today's robust discussion and how we can work together to address the Rohingya crisis and the conflict in Burma that is driving it. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. And I would like to note that other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. And we are pleased to have a distinguished panel of witnesses before us today on this very important topic. The Honorable Kelley Currie, non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Indo-Pacific Security Initiative. Thanks for being with us. Steve Ross is a senior fellow from the Stimson Center. Thank you for being with us. Lucky Karim, the Executive Director of Refugee Women for Peace and Justice. Appreciate you joining us today. This committee recognizes the importance of the issues before us, and we are grateful to have you here to speak with us today. Your full statements will be made part of the record, and I'll ask each of you to keep your spoken remarks to 5 minutes in order to allow time for member questions. I now recognize Ambassador Currie for your opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Chairman, and ranking members, and other members of the committee for hosting and convening this important hearing at a time when the world is largely ignoring what's happening in Burma. I've worked on Burma for 3 decades. This is both the most depressing and most hopeful I've been about Burma, and I think you can read my full statement to understand a little bit of why. I must first clarify that my remarks solely represent my personal views and not any of the many organizations with which I'm affiliated, and I do refer you to my full statement for my entire remarks. I'm going to focus on a few recommendations. I think that one of the things that is really key to understanding what is going on in Burma right now is that you have these trends that all of the committee leadership spoke about in terms of the scam centers. They did not mention rare earth mining, but that is another big issue for Burma. There are just a number of intersecting conflict economies that are fueling this war. And the main beneficiary of these conflict economies and the war itself is not even the Burmese junta at this point. It is the People's Republic of China. I think that it is important to understand that China wants to see Burma weak, divided, and dependent. That is their objective. That is what they are trying to accomplish through their proxies, whether it's the United Wa State Army or their occasional intervention to support and backstop the military regime, the continuous flow of weapons that they provide the military regime. They want to see the junta successfully pull off these elections and bring a level of stability that allows them to continue to do business and pull resources out of Burma without the costs that they're having to deal with right now, the annoying problems of the conflict that Beijing has to bear. At the same time, when it comes to the scam centers and the rare earth mining, Beijing is rapacious in the way that they deal with these things. The scam centers could not exist without the support that the regime in Beijing provides to them. These scam centers are largely the guts, the backbone behind them, and this is a $35 billion a year global industry. I want to be clear about that, and growing quickly. They are using technology in a way that is astounding. AI, they were just rated and had hundreds of Starlink units powering their internet. They are at the center of a web of some of the worst human trafficking I've ever seen in 30 years working on human rights, and most abusive human trafficking system. And they are deeply connected, and this is one thing I think we don't really understand very well or talk about. These scam centers started out as a way to launder money, including drug money from the Mexican cartels. They've become a line of business on their own, but at heart, they're really a massive money laundering organization that benefits the very cartels that are killing Americans with fentanyl. And there's an increasing link between the cartels and the fentanyl production in the Western Hemisphere and the drug production and these transnational Chinese criminal organizations that are underlying this entire web of global illicit activities. And Burma is at the center of it. And it is a strange place to be at the center of a global network of criminality, but because of the disaggregated sovereignty in parts of Burma and the lawlessness, it has become the perfect breeding ground for these activities. So this is a national security threat to the United States, as the leadership mentioned. We do have tools we can use, whether it's with our ally Thailand or our adversary Beijing, to ratchet down pressure on these activities. We need to stop removing sanctions on Burma's arms dealers. We need to make clear that we will not recognize their illicit and illegal election. But at the end of the day, much of the source of the problem for what we're dealing with in Burma derives from across the border in the People's Republic of China. And we need to understand that as we start to think about the solutions that this committee and the administration put forward. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. That's very, very powerful statement, and we've taken a lot of notes, and I really look forward to engaging you in questions afterwards. Thank you. I now recognize Ms. Karim for your opening statement.
Thank you, Madam and Mr. Chairman. My name is Lucky Karim. I'm a member of the Rohingya community from Burma. I'd like to start by thanking members of the committee for holding this hearing and for passing the Burma Genocide and Accountability Protection Act, or Burma GAP Act, out of committee. I was forced to flee my home at the age of 14 in August 2017 when the Burmese military waged a genocidal attack against the Rohingya people in Rakhine State. As a child, I lived in the world's largest refugee settlement in Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh for 6 years. The Burmese military regime has been persecuting the Rohingya in Myanmar for decades. Since the military coup in Myanmar in February 2021, the political, economic, and humanitarian crisis in the country has only grown more dire for the Rohingya as well as other ethnic minorities in Burma. The remaining members of the Rohingya community in Rakhine State are dying from hunger. Internally displaced people have zero access to humanitarian aid. And the genocidal violence continues even to this day. As a result, tens of thousands of people have been forced to flee their homes since 2023, bringing the total population of people languishing in the Cox's Bazar camps to more than 1.3 million. I only have 5 minutes for this testimony, but I could spend the entire day listing the abuses suffered by the other ethnic and religious groups in Burma. Not only Rohingya Muslim, but also Shang, Karen, Kachin, Moin, Karenni, Rakhine, Shin, Christian, Buddhist, and Hindu all across our diverse nation have endured years of persecution, war crimes, and indiscriminate violence by the Burmese military. All minorities have suffered and all need to be part of the democratization process. Despite the reality on the ground, Burma's military regime is planning a sham election next month. This election will never be free or fair. It is only the way for the military regime to seek international legitimacy. Our risky journeys out of Myanmar in pursuit of a better life did not start when the genocidal attacks against us began in 2017. People have been fleeing in persecution since at least the 1970s, forced to be refugees in neighboring countries like Bangladesh or elsewhere. I traveled back to Bangladesh refugee camps 2 times this year. When I was there in February, the World Food Program was preparing to announce cuts to full ration for refugees to go down from $12 to just $6 per month for each individual. This is a cut that would have had devastating consequences. Thankfully, the United States has stepped up to continue funding, but that funding will only last a few more months. Meanwhile, the closing of USAID and broader aid cuts have forced health clinics, learning centers, and other programs to close. People in Cox's Bazar camps are fully dependent on the full ration that they receive once a month because the majority of them have zero earnings. There are no livelihood opportunities for families in the camps. The government of Bangladesh, long a generous host to Rohingya refugees, has done much for my community. But expanding access to livelihood and education would do perhaps more than any other policy to ensure a safe and sustainable future for the Rohingya community. In our homeland, most urgently, too many of our people continue to die due to violence and hunger. The international community and the US government must act now to pressure the Myanmar military to stop its attacks and to allow aid into Rakhine and other areas across the country, facing high levels of food insecurity as we consider the future for my community. Repatriation to our ancestral homeland is the ultimate solution. It has been said before by myself and many other Rohingya, but bears repeating, we the Rohingya community want to go back to our homeland in Rakhine State when it is safe to do so. Here is what the US government can do more to help us. Congress should pass the Burma Genocide Accountability and Protection Act, or the Burma GAP Act, which lays out a comprehensive policy for addressing many of the crises affecting our country. It would support refugees and internally displaced people. It would address the need for accountability for genocide and crimes against humanity by the Burmese military. It would also promote long-term solutions for the Rohingya, such as citizenship rights, safe and voluntarily return to Burma, inclusion in a future federal democratic system. The bill also authorized the creation of a US special representative for Burma and calls on the administration to refuse to recognize the Burmese military as the country's legitimate government. This is so important ahead of the sham elections scheduled for next month. Congress should also call for the immediate restoration of the US refugee resettlement program. I'm one of a few who have benefited from the kindness of the American people and America's rich history for resettling refugees. It has given me and many others the opportunity to speak up on the world stage in support of my community. And the United States should continue to engage the Bangladesh government towards providing education and livelihood opportunities for Rohingya refugees. I would like to end here with a question for you. What will it take for my people to be able to live freely and securely in our home in Burma? And when the future generation of Rohingya look back, will they still be asking the same question, or will they be home at last, asking simply what took so long? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Karim, for those questions, and we hope to address those. That's the whole purpose of this hearing, because we wanted to make sure that the suffering and the suffering of the Rohingya population are not forgotten, and we wanted to make sure that we are paying attention. So I hope those who are watching and listening know how committed we are. Thank you. I didn't mean to skip over you. As I was talking to my colleague over here, ladies first. So let me now recognize Mr. Ross for your opening statement.
Chairwoman Kim, Chairman Huizinga, Ranking Members Bera and Kamlager-Dove, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify and for your continued attention to Myanmar. In summarizing my written statement, I will emphasize 3 key points. First, the Myanmar military is the primary driver of instability within Myanmar and has been so for decades. Second, planned elections are an attempt to consolidate and entrench the military's control in Myanmar. And third, the regime that emerges from elections will continue to pose a threat to stability in Myanmar, the region, and U.S. interests in both the Indo-Pacific and at home. Nearly 5 years ago, a military coup in Myanmar prevented a democratically elected parliament from taking office. After the military opened fire on peaceful protesters, armed resistance grew, and Myanmar's civil war expanded to most of the country. In response, the Myanmar military has waged a brutal counterinsurgency campaign with devastating and intentional impacts on civilians. The Myanmar military has killed thousands of civilians, many victims of indiscriminate airstrikes and torture, jailed 20,000 political prisoners, torched 120,000 homes, displaced 3.5 million people, blocked humanitarian aid and access to communications, and implemented a system of state surveillance. Despite this, resistance forces have made remarkable gains against the military. Operation 1027, a key 2023 offensive, yielded unprecedented territorial victories and demonstrated unprecedented collaboration among ethnic and Burmese armed groups. Territorial gains have allowed resistance actors to establish or consolidate bottom-up governance structures, providing social services and humanitarian assistance. Significant support from China, the forced conscription of 80,000, and an escalation of air attacks has enabled the Myanmar military to shift some of the momentum on the battlefield over the past year, but it has only managed to regain a fraction of the territory it has lost. It is in this context that the Myanmar military now plans to hold elections beginning December 28th. The results are foreordained. A 2023 law effectively dissolved political parties, including the National League for Democracy, which won 86% of the 498 seats elected to the parliament in 2020. In contrast, the 57 parties contesting this year won only 11% of seats, and only one party, the military proxy USDP, won more than 5 seats. The regime also changed the electoral system to include proportional representation, to give the impression that elections are taking place in a wider swath of territory than will be the case. Stifling dissent, the military has arrested 200 people under a new law that punishes criticism of or disruption to the elections. These so-called elections will not be free, fair, or inclusive. They do not represent the will of the Myanmar people, and they do not present a path either towards democracy or a peaceful and sustainable solution to Myanmar's conflict. Rather, they are intended to garner international recognition for the regime in the hopes that this will translate into political, financial, and military support that enables it to consolidate control. If it succeeds, the Myanmar military will continue to pose a threat to regional instability and U.S. interests in the Indo-Pacific and at home. China wields unparalleled and growing sway in Myanmar, throwing its weight around to advance its geostrategic interests through major infrastructure projects, trade routes, and access to Myanmar's rare earths. China also seeks to maintain leverage over all stakeholders in Myanmar and ensure Myanmar remains within its sphere of influence and the West stays out. Though it may be tempting to engage the Myanmar military to contain China, doing so would undermine U.S. interests. Scam centers have proliferated since the coup, with Chinese crime syndicates, the Myanmar military, and military-aligned militias all profiting from the $10 billion Americans lost to scams last year. A recent crackdown on KK Park is purely performative. Scam leaders were allowed to escape, evidence was destroyed, and dozens of scam centers with over 100,000 people, many trafficking victims, continue to operate with impunity. Myanmar is also the world's largest producer of opium, and the production of methamphetamines and synthetic drugs has surged since the coup. Moreover, Myanmar is the world's 6th leading source of refugees and with a collapse in immunizations and treatment for infectious disease, risks becoming a hotspot for global health crises. Given that the threat that the Myanmar military poses to the U.S. interests, Congress and the U.S. administration should reject the military planned elections and the regime that emerges, while encouraging partners and allies in the region to do the same. Engage and support the spectrum of democratic and resistance actors who offer a better prospect for securing a peaceful Myanmar that advances U.S. interests. Provide continued life-saving humanitarian support to populations in Myanmar and refugees in neighboring countries while ensuring aid is not channeled through the military. Seek to counterbalance Chinese influence while managing expectations for the U.S. role. And building upon recent efforts, address transnational crime through additional targeted sanctions, enhanced enforcement and coordination, and improved investigative capacity. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much for all of your wonderful testimonies. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. So we've all heard from you, and you know there is going to be a election that's taking place soon, next month. But under the current situation, political prisoners are still detained, and opposition parties are excluded, and the military controls the elections. So we know the election will be predetermined, as we mentioned. So under these conditions, can any legitimate electoral outcome occur? And how should the United States respond to that? And do we categorically just reject those elections, or is there any value in limited engagement? I'd like to ask Ambassador Currie and Mr. Ross to respond.
Thank you for the question, Madam Chairwoman. I think that we must refuse to recognize the elections. They will be categorical. I mean, there's no way they could represent a genuine expression of the will of the Burmese people, for all the reasons that have been laid out already. I think that the other important thing to do is to recognize the decisive enabler role that China, again, is playing with the elections. They are not only publicly backing the elections and the regime in this role, but they are putting pressure on other ASEAN countries to have ASEAN recognize and participate in these elections. So far, ASEAN has resisted that pressure. It is important regionally that we backstop ASEAN and make sure that they understand that we will not recognize the elections and encourage them also not to agree to recognize those elections. I think also that we need to be very clear about, typically we have legislation in place that is global that allows us to put sanctions on individuals who are involved in tearing down democratic institutions, and we can use those authorities. I would encourage that we do that. I think we also need to make it very clear by getting rid of regime-appointed diplomats who are in the United States, especially those who are involved in terrorizing Myanmar citizens who are here in the United States. And that includes the military attachés at the embassy here and at their permanent mission in New York who are involved in transnational oppression. Those individuals are likely to be used to force people and coerce them to participate in this election. And we want to make sure that they are not doing that on U.S. soil. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ross.
Thank you. I agree with Ambassador Currie and would add that I don't think that the elections can be viewed as legitimate and that they should be rejected by the U.S. What the military is hoping out of these elections is that there will be a slippery slope of recognition and support from within the region that flows to beyond it, and that will translate into the political, financial, and military support that will enable it to consolidate control in Myanmar. And as I've stated in my opening statement and in my written statement, I think that is counter to U.S. interests. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know both of you talked about the China's influence and how they control so much of what's going on right now, and including, of course, I pay a lot of attention to the importance of critical mineral supply chain, and this is also an issue, but we wanted to focus much today's hearing on sham elections and scam centers and the implications of Beijing backing the junta to victory through these illegitimate elections. So can you quickly talk about what leverage that we have? You talked about using the sanctions and all, but is there any ways that we can really come down on what's happening, and what kind of leverage can United States have to mitigate the consequences of a China-backed military regime?
I think we do still have headroom on our sanctions regimes to ensure that we are not facilitating the financial resources that allow the regime to conduct the election and then continue to operate after these, before, during, and after. We have been very effective in terms of cutting off arms access and financial pathways for the regime, but there is still more that we can do there. And again, the purpose of sanctions is to keep these illicit transactions out of the U.S. Financial system. So we have a vested interest in keeping these bad actors out. So I think we do need to think more creatively and aggressively, and we need to stop taking sanctions off of people like the arms dealer that we just removed sanctions for no apparent reason on one of the regime's biggest arms dealers. So we need to stop doing things like that, and we need to support the opposition, find more creative ways to assist the democratic opposition through the kinds of means that Chairman Huizinga has put forward in the Burma Brave Act and in the Burma Act that has already passed Congress and been signed by the president and has a lot of tools available. Sorry for going over time.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry. My time's up, so I'm going to recognize Ranking Member Cindy Kamnagle-Dove for questions.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Ms. Karim, I wanted to expand on something that you'd mentioned in your opening testimony about the restrictions placed on the Rohingyas' ability to leave the camps or earn a living. Can you speak to the impact that funding cuts to the humanitarian response have on the refugees' quality of life?
Thank you. I think we've seen two types of aid cards in the past. One time it went down from $12 to $10. The other time it went down from $12 to $8 for ration food from World Food Program that the refugee receive every month. And we've seen hundreds of women and children have taken risks on a tiny boat traveling to neighboring countries. They intended to arrive in Malaysia, but they end up in Indonesia, Thailand, and even Myanmar border and be jailed for 5 years in a passport case or so. We've seen those results happen when the aid cards two times happened in the past. And then, as I mentioned in my opening statement, but also in the written statement, it was the announcement. And the announcement we're preparing already in February. And if that happened, then we would assume that people might even return back to Burma and be killed, because that's the only option refugees would then have. Because we've seen refugees, when they arrive in those neighboring countries, they're not being welcomed or recognized as refugee and are not being allowed to work, and they are being called the illegal immigrant in those countries, and even being detained for years and years. So those are the recent impacts of the aid cards we've seen, but there are many. The programs for women and children in the camps, for GBV, for example, protections and other programs have completely been closed in the camps, including the learning centers for children that used to be run by UNICEF and other agencies in the camps have completely been closed.
So thank you for that. Also, I know that this year the Trump administration terminated U.S. support for the Asian University for Women in Bangladesh, which allows disadvantaged women to get higher education via U.S.-funded scholarships. So could you speak to, and maybe you too, Ambassador Currie, speak to the impact of that program for Rohingya girls and the need for education for children in the camps?
Yeah. I was one of the first Rohingya girl to begin with and to go to the university back in 2019. And we now have, I think, 100 or so students already at the campus. For generations and generations in Burma, Rohingya have been denied access to education after just high schools. And so this was the first time in many generations that the larger group of women had access to higher education at the university, and that allows women to be part of the decision-making processes, to speak up against their injustice, and to be able to do the works in the camps freely, and to serve the community and their families. And I'm one of the examples of that. getting access to the educations from that university and being able to deliver the messages of my community today. So that will allow Rohingya women to prevent from gender-based violence, from sexual violence, from even human traffickers, to get access to education. So I would encourage to continue funding the programs and to allow Rohingya children in the camps, and especially girls in particular at the university, to continue studying.
Thank you. I don't know, Ambassador Currie, if you wanted to add.
I think you can see from Lucky that she is one of the success stories of that program and that initiative. There was also an initiative to fund slots at that same university for Afghan women and girls that has also been, as far as I know, is also gone. This is again, very small program. It was a really, but very high impact. We were able to leverage small amounts of funding, give the scholarships through the Asian University for Women, and it created a network of women within the camps who were able to advocate for their own rights, the rights of their family, the rights of their camp block, to deal with situations of gender-based violence, of criminal gangs operating in the camps. These women were really, and have been, and still are, one of the main protective elements in the camps, where there aren't very many protective elements. And you have to imagine a city of 1.3 million people that is basically run by criminal gangs, and that's mostly comprised of women and children. And you can only, let your mind wander to where that ends up. It is a really dangerous and deprived place, the camps in Kutupalong. And so these women really are incredible in the work that they do inside the camps and to protect their communities and their families. Thank you.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize Chairman Huizenga for your 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to first start by actually submitting for the record the letter signed by the 90 groups.
So, yes, without objection.
Thank you. And I want to say thank you to each of you for being here and helping shed some light on this. And Ambassador Currie, I'm going to start with you. In June of 2024, the UN Special Rapporteur, Tom Andrews, produced a report called Banking on the Death Trade, and he found that the junta is increasingly reliant on Thai companies and banks to facilitate the importation of weapons and other material, making Thailand the leading source of Burmese military supplies purchased through the international banking system. Additionally, with the sanctioning of the MFTB and the MICB, the junta has moved its financial services to the MEB. And my bill, which you had mentioned, the Brave Burma Act, calls for mandatory sanctions on the MEB, and the impact would allow U.S. and allied sanctions on MEB to disrupt the junta's ability to wage war. And I might add that there's a few other initiatives, the Burma Gap Act and the Dismantle Foreign Scam Syndicates Act, offered by Ranking Member Meeks and our colleague from Indiana, Mr. Shreve, respectively, and I believe they should be considered necessary steps to cripple the junta as well. But could you illuminate us a little bit on what that would mean to disrupting the military junta's ability to wage war against these ethnic resistance organizations?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. I think that what we should do, first of all, is thank the Thais for following up on that report and debanking the entities that were involved. Unfortunately, as you know, the Myanmar Economic Bank, the MEB, has set up another pathway. So we do need to put full sanctions on the MEB. There was an argument at one point that there would be humanitarian effects on this and that it would create problems for the people of Burma. But I think it's important to understand that most people in Burma do not use the formal banking system. They do everything they can to avoid any engagement with the formal economy, with the government, because it is so predatory, and they know that the government treats the MEB, or the junta, I shouldn't call it the government, the junta treats the MEB as a piggy bank to fund the war effort. So they are very well aware of this, and so they avoid those official systems. And it's believed that the effect will be minimal. But we do need to, we do know that MEB is sanctioning, is still moving forward, and sanctioning MEB would interrupt some of the flows from Russia and China that allow them to purchase weapons, because Russia and China want to be paid in dollars. They do not want jot. Let's be very clear. They are setting up some alternative mechanisms to pay in renminbi, but the Russians want cash on the barrelhead. They need hard currency, and so they need the money. So sanctioning MEB and UAB, which is another path that they use, another bank, would be very important. Thank you.
So I'm hearing keep the pressure up on Thailand. Thank them for what they've done, but let's continue that conversation. Sorry, I'm going to be trying to go quickly to both Ms. Karim and possibly Mr. Ross here. Until this really resolves, I'm curious what influence does the U.S. have with host countries like Bangladesh to prevent harmful repatriation of the refugees to the Rakhine state? So, and Karim, if you would like.
Thank you. As I clearly mentioned in the written statement, I think it is just not safe for us for refugees in Cox's Bazar to return back to Myanmar. There has to be much more to get done to create a condition that would allow Rohingya to return back to Myanmar. And the U.S. could definitely support creating some international monitoring inside the country to make sure the conditions and situations are getting improved. And there are parts, though it sounds like impossible to send back these refugees at this time, given the ground reality, but there are parts allowing internally displaced people to return back to their homes without any conditions and restrictions, and then allowing the humanitarian actors, organizations, and donors to operate legally and freely within the Rakhine state to improve the condition and provide humanitarian aids for those who are still remaining in the country.
Okay, Mr. Ross, 10 seconds.
Yeah, I would just add that there are several countries in the region that have forcibly repatriated Myanmar nationals, not only Rohingya, into Myanmar, despite the risks that they have faced in doing so. And there is a role that the U.S. can play in engaging with these countries, encouraging them not to undertake this practice, and ensuring that non-refoulement is not an option that they pursue. Thanks.
I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. I now recognize the gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Amo, Representative Amo.
Thank you, Chairwoman Kim and Chairman Huizenga, for hosting this joint hearing, and thank you to the ranking members, and thank you to our witnesses for being here. You know, on May 21st, Secretary Rubio testified in front of our committee and told me directly in my questioning that no children are dying on our watch. That's because of the Trump administration's cuts to foreign aid. Quote, no children are dying on our watch, unquote. That was true, untrue then, and it's untrue today. Children were dying on his watch, and sadly, they still are. Recent reporting found that President Trump and Secretary Rubio's cuts to our foreign assistance program and the illegal dismantling of USAID led to the deaths of over 600,000 people, including 400,000 children worldwide. To put that in perspective, Chair Kim, that is more than the entire population of Anaheim, 346,000, and Orange, 139,000 in your district, or more than twice the population of Grand Rapids, 200,000, or Kalamazoo, 73,000 in Michigan, Chair Huizenga. More than 500,000 people are dead because of this administration's callousness. And few countries have been hit as hard as Burma. Look, civilians are dying at the hands of Burmese military junta, but also from malnutrition and lack of medical care. The United Nations estimates over 6 million children in Burma need humanitarian assistance. Now, before Trump's literal incineration of our foreign aid, the United States was the largest supporter of aid to Burma and Burmese refugees in surrounding countries. Congress had specifically authorized funds in a bipartisan effort to help the people of Burma. But while the president has made new commitments focused on refugees, these cuts already decimated aid programs in Burma. Health care centers were shuttered, and the World Food Program was forced to cut back on food aid to over 1 million people. A Rohingya resident of a Burmese internment camp, Mohammed Tahir, said, quote, "I lost my son because of the funding cuts, and it is not only me. Many more children in other camps have also died helplessly from hunger, malnutrition, and no medical treatment," unquote. Mohammed shared this story 2 weeks before Secretary Rubio was here in our committee, claiming that no children were dying under his watch. To be very clear, people have needlessly died because of this administration's decisions, and they're still dying. We could restart many of these aid programs tomorrow. The funds that Congress appropriated to save lives and support American jobs is available. We could bolster the production of ready-to-use therapeutic foods like Plumpy Nut, made by Adesia Nutrition in Rhode Island. Plumpy Nut, as you might know, is a miracle product that can save a child from severe acute malnutrition in as little as 6 weeks using U.S.-grown food products that support American workers and families. Ms. Karim, could you please describe the role of American-funded emergency food products, things like Plumpy Nut, and the role that they play in Burma and for the Burmese refugee populations in surrounding countries? And how are the cuts to American-funded food programs threatening the lives of children that had previously been served?
Well, I'm not sure I can do that in 70 seconds, but what I can say is
I'm sorry, that was for
Oh, sorry,
Ms.
I
Currie.
thought you said-
Yeah. That's okay.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I think largely United States has been one of the largest donors to Rohingya refugees from day one. We're very grateful for that. And U.S.'s funding is not only serving the people in the camps, feeding the people, but it is also an encouragement to other donor countries to step up or to step back from funding the programs in the camps. After the U.S. aid cuts, we've seen UK, Germany, and other largest donors to Rohingya refugees have also stepping away from funding. And we're grateful for the recent $60 million funds for life-saving assistance programs in the camps by the United States in September. The U.S. aid cuts largely and more directly and personally have impacted the community members in the camps, and especially for children, including nutrition and learning centers, as I said, and the other programs that used to provide protections and other programs in the camp that have completely been eliminated after the U.S. aid cuts. And that puts children as a group as a whole at huge risks, including being trafficked and kidnapped in many countries, even within the camps, and even being forcibly recruited by the armed actors in the camps to be sent back to Myanmar for a fight against the military. And we've seen hundreds of people were also sent back to Myanmar by the armed actors because they have nothing to do in the camps, simply. They're not going to schools, they don't have anything to do, they're just in their tiny shelters whole day and whole night. So the U.S. aid cuts as at large have directly and more personally impacted the lives of refugees, but in particular the women and children.
Thank you for sharing that. And so I know my time is expiring, but it's very clear. Lives harmed irreparably, and also these foreign aid cuts are devastating our credibility in the region. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Representative Perry, for your questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to our witnesses for being here. It distresses me that we start out the conversation by blaming the United States of American taxpayers and citizens for the problems in Burma. And I remind my colleagues on the other side of the aisle that this has been going on for a long time. They might not have been here, but I have been here. And the United States, in many cases, and certainly under other administrations, have sent humanitarian assistance, which we all want to do. We all want to help. But I sat in this very room and complained that while we all were complaining about the plight of the Rohingya, by the time we got to doing something real about it, there weren't going to be any Rohingya left. So it distresses me that that's where we're going to start the conversation. So let's move on to something where we can actually try and find some tangible results, some success here. I guess I'm going to turn to Mr. Ross and Ms. Currie about what we can do as the United States of America that doesn't encumber our taxpayers anymore, because we're $38 trillion in debt, right? But what can we do that's actually going to have a tangible result impacting negatively the junta in Burma, right? What about the STAR, the Stolen Asset Recovery System? What about access to SWIFT? What are things that we can do to hobble them and empower the people of Burma and the Rohingya? Go ahead, any one of you.
Sure, I'll start. Thank you for the question. I think there are several things that the U.S. can and should be doing that do not require financial resources. It does not require resources for us to reject the elections, to engage partners and allies in the region to do the same. What the Myanmar military craves is legitimacy, and denying them that will have follow-on impacts for their ability to wage war against the Myanmar people. In addition to that, I think the sanctions regime that's been imposed has been a good starting point. I would go beyond the imposition of sanctions itself and look at coordination, both interagency within the U.S. on sanctions enforcement and coordination with allies and partners outside of the U.S. to ensure that it is not just U.S. sanctions that are having an impact. I'll stop there.
And to date, from any administration, those things haven't really been imposed or refined to the furthest extent that they could be. Is that about right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
I think there's been a strong imposition of sanctions in incremental manner, but the enforcement has not been nearly as strong as it could be.
Okay, ma'am.
Yes, sir. I would agree that there are ways. The first thing that I think we should do is consider placing frozen Burmese assets. There's about $1.5 billion in frozen Burmese funds, foreign exchange funds that are sitting in managed account, that are sitting in an account right now, just frozen. We can put those into a managed account and use the interest to provide for some of the humanitarian needs, use the growth or whatever interest on those accounts, much as we're doing with Ukraine with the Russian assets.
And that requires no act of Congress, right? The Treasury can do that on its own.
Treasury can do that with its independent authority today.
Okay.
We should also make sure that countries that are receiving humanitarian assistance from the United States, whether through the United Nations or bilaterally, are providing opportunities for refugees and refugee communities to do work themselves. These people want to work. They will work inside the camps. They will do things, work for pay. And the governments in these countries, Bangladesh, sadly, but also Thailand, has limited the ability of people to work. And Thailand has a labor shortage. They need workers, but they deny them the opportunity to do this. And so we need to be more robust in using our diplomacy to help alleviate some of the burden by allowing these communities to be a little bit more self-sustaining and have access to other services locally. And we can work with them to provide those services in a much more cost-effective way. It's cheaper for us to give the Thais some support to allow access, or Burmese or Bangladesh some support to allow access to local services than for us to create a parallel system for the refugees. So there are ways we can maximize what we're doing without spending more money while also benefiting these communities in important ways. Burma has been kicked out of the SWIFT system for some time. Again, clamping down on some of these things, also going after crypto and taking money that they've stolen, whether it's scam centers or the government, out of crypto accounts and moving it into the new US crypto account that we can do with the asset recovery would be a great way to help support some of these programs.
So with the chairman's indulgence, I would just say to you two individuals, if you would get the list of things that you would recommend to my office, we would like to put that in a form to the administration as a request. And I imagine you'll have a lot of people in this committee on both sides of the aisle that are interested in being a part of that. And with that, I yield back and I thank the chair.
Sure. I now recognize Ranking Member Ami Bera from California for your 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and my apologies, I had to step out, so if this is ground that's already been covered. Maybe it's a question for Mr. Ross. Getting an assessment of where the conflict is right now, there have been times where the various ethnic resistance groups have made progress. It does seem like it's either at a stalemate or perhaps they've lost some of that progress as China's kind of changed. Could you give us an assessment of what you see on the ground?
Sure. Thank you for the question. I don't like the term stalemate for the conflict in Myanmar. It is a very dynamic conflict, and it's constantly changing. Over the last 2 years, the resistance and ethnic armed groups have made significant territorial gains since the launch of Operation 1027 in Shan State, in Kachin State in the north near the border with China, in the southeast in Currie, in the west in Rakhine State, as well as in the center in some Bamar majority regions. Some of those gains have been rolled back a bit in the last year as China has swung behind the military and put significant pressure on ethnic armed groups, particularly those on the China-Myanmar border, that have pressed them into bilateral ceasefire agreements, which have then allowed the Myanmar military to redeploy resources and arms against other armed actors. So that has shifted the momentum somewhat over the last year, but the military has only been able to retake small parts of the land that it has lost, and there are significant parts of the country that it does not control, and that will be reflected in where elections can and cannot be held when they start next month.
And can I get your assessment on cooperation amongst the various ethnic resistance groups? Are they working well together? Are they fighting with each other?
Yeah, it varies around the country. I would say that Operation 1027 again was a sort of critical moment because it demonstrated a really unprecedented degree of collaboration between ethnic armed groups and Burmese resistance actors. Prior to that, some of the most important ethnic armed groups had not sat on the sidelines, but had limited their engagement to training and support. Once they entered the fight in October of 2023, there was much more operational collaboration. Some of that is at risk, though. China has put significant pressure on ethnic armed groups not to collaborate among themselves and with Burmese resistance actors, because that is seen as a significant threat to the regime in Naypyidaw, which has over decades pursued a divide and rule approach that has sought to split communities from one another, and China has aided and abetted that over the last year.
Right. And then just in the last few minutes I have to Ambassador Currie or to you, Mr. Ross, how can we best engage and support the ASEAN nations in this? And then what would you like Congress to do to support the resistant groups outside of what you've already covered in terms of sanctions and secondary sanctions?
Thank you for the question, sir. I think that as far as supporting the resistance groups, there is plenty of legislation already on the books that would allow the administration to do so. There are multiple problems, one being that the regional bureau that is now responsible for assistance to Burma is not well suited to be implementing programs in this kind of conflict. Also, because Burma is one of these seam issues, it's a problem both in the South Central Asia Bureau and the East Asia Pacific Bureau, as evidenced by this hearing today. But those bureaus are not working together to address the problem. In fact, EAP feels very proprietary about Burma and tends to block out SCA Bureau from dealing with it, even though they are hosting 1.3 million refugees and are downstream of a lot of the consequences, and India plays a very important role here too. So there's a need. I think the special coordinator or special, if any situation cries out for some kind of special envoy, it is Burma. And so pushing the administration to appoint someone who can look at the problem holistically and recommend programs, recommend policy, really take ownership in a way, and it needs to be a senior level person. Right now, the person handling Burma is a DAS.
What would you recommend us with the ASEAN nations in Southeast Asia? What would you want us to push them to do?
Again, you need someone like this, a senior level diplomat who can focus on Burma, who can go to the ASEAN ministerials and meet with the ambassadors here in town solely to talk about the issue of Burma, because it's like number 7 on the list of priorities for EAP and ECA.
So asking for a special envoy would be something that you'd recommend Congress push for?
Continually, yes.
Great. Thank you very much. I believe that is something that we've been pushing for, and have that special envoy in place to specifically serve and pay attention to what's going on in Burma, and that should be elevated to the ambassadorial level, as you mentioned. So I wholeheartedly agree with that. I believe that is covered in the Burma Act, which we're working on, so thank you. I now recognize the gentleman from Guam, Representative Molan. for your 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And yes, I appreciate this hearing today and hearing what you folks have to say. It's really a poor situation that we are in. And I recall just reading the Economist article just in June, where it talks about the same thing that you've been discussing. They start with an earthquake, almost 4,000 people died. And then what happens next? The military coup in 2021, 10,000 civilians passed away there. And then the U.S. estimates that there's 3 million that have been displaced and 2 million in the blink of a famine. And all this made now Myanmar as a hub of lawlessness in Asia. We've got illicit drug production. We have human trafficking, and we have a huge scam industry booming. We need to do something different. And I like what I hear from the recommendations that you have and where we're going with this committee. But with these issues, of course, the only one that seems to be happy here is the People's Republic of China, right? And they enjoy conflict. And they come in saying, we want to negotiate peace and trying to make a Western fear-mongering. And China says it can, otherwise they'll bully them. China says they can restrict electricity, water, internet access, goods, and a whole bunch more. So it's a threat to be peaceful. What a joke. And in the recent State Authorization Act from this committee, I included an amendment that looks at promoting smart investment strategies, as you were discussing, to countries that receive aid from us. And no doubt the famine, disasters, and senseless killings should be approached from an international cooperation, and I appreciate what you're trying to do to make that happen. These efforts deserve their due attention and funding, but if Myanmar and the United Wa State Army refuse to cooperate with the United States while giving preference to China, I believe our aid should reflect their careless decision. And this is about putting the people before power. So, Ambassador Currie, thank you for your long career and doing what you do and still wanting to continue. And your expertise in this is very helpful for us to understand. So your role in the Burma Transition Initiative, what do you see Myanmar going from its current situation, and what meaningful options, and I have heard some that you'd like to expand upon, will give us some stability from this chaos?
Thank you, sir, for that question. Look, Burma is I started out as a congressional staffer 30 years ago working on Burma, as I was telling Chairwoman Kim. And so many things that I dealt with 30 years ago are still problems today, and the United Wa State Army is one of them. They've only grown more powerful, wealthier, and more influential. We have sanctioned them for decades, and because we refuse to address the root cause of the problem, which is, again, in Kunming and Beijing and the People's Republic of China, the decisive enablers of this conflict, just as they are in the conflict in Ukraine, they will continue to be able to be a scourge on the people of Burma and the region as one of the world's largest drug producers. They are to Asia what the cartels in Mexico are to the Western Hemisphere. I need to make people understand that. It is really a huge problem. Singapore continues to host their leadership and allow them to buy property there. Thailand continues to give them citizenship. The People's Republic of China especially continues to host their businesses and their wealth. We need to put secondary sanctions in place that really try to squeeze them and really empower the Drug Enforcement Agency and the Treasury Department to go after their assets. They have billions of dollars in assets. They can be targeted more effectively. As far as some of the other things that I think we can do, peace will only come to Burma when the people of that country are allowed to drive their own future without the interference of their big neighbor, China, and without the military creating the enabling environment for conflict that they have created since independence in that country for the past 80 years. So it is imperative that the military be driven out of power. That there is no other way. And the people are doing it themselves. This is a DIY revolution. They get no support from anybody, but they're fighting and they're winning without any help from us or anybody else. And so we should stop helping their adversaries at a minimum. Like, let's just stop helping their adversaries. And they can do this, and then let them have the political space to solve their own problems.
Thank you so much. I ran out of time. I appreciate the comments. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize the gentlelady from Washington, Representative Jayapal, for your 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, for holding what I think is a really important and informative hearing. Thank you very much to our witnesses. I think we're all concerned about the plight of the millions harmed by the military junta in Burma and the many others, including especially the Rohingya, who have fled to all these neighboring countries. And I think as I've been listening to the three of you, I'm reminded again about the importance of all the tools in our toolbox. And I know this hearing is titled America's Limited Options. I think we actually have more options in front of us than perhaps we are recognizing. And I'm reminded in my 10 years of development work across the world, including in South and Southeast Asia, the three-legged stool was always security, humanitarian assistance, and development assistance. And I think that is still relevant here. I wanted to talk about China first because I think both Mr. Ross and Ambassador Currie, you've both spoken about this, and I think it's critically important. Given China's demonstrated interest in keeping the military junta in power, can you just briefly discuss why that is actually a reason for clear and consistent U.S. engagement in Burma? Because I think there's a constant discussion in the United States about whether something is in the American interest, and to me, you both have laid out a very clear case for why it is in our interest to engage on this issue. So maybe if you can briefly speak to this. I know, Mr. Ross, you recently authored an article about this topic as well.
Sure, I can start. Thank you for the question. I think clear and consistent is a really important factor here. Since the coup, I think expectations have been raised about what the role the U.S. and other international actors can and will be in Myanmar. There are significant authorities that exist, particularly under the Burma Act and under the executive order that came out after the coup, but those have not been fully implemented to the extent possible. And that both created expectations among the population in Myanmar about what role the U.S. would play and provided a pretext for China to become more involved and more fully back the Myanmar military. So I think being clear and consistent is an important through line for U.S. policy on Myanmar. I would add just a degree of nuance on China, which is that the relationship between the Myanmar military and China is a somewhat uncomfortable one. China does not like Min Aung Hlaing, and they are hoping that these elections create an alternate source of power that they can back instead of him. I don't necessarily think that things will play out in that way. I think Min Aung Hlaing wants to hold on to both the commander-in-chief role and the presidency. And if that plays out in that way, it's possible that the pendulum of Chinese support for the military regime will shift back in a different direction. But more broadly, I think that engaging clearly, consistently, finding ways to support the various democratic and resistance actors that have the support of the people in Myanmar and are building up grassroots governance structures that will be a model for going forward is a way to go for U.S. policy.
Anything you want to quickly add, Ambassador?
Yes, ma'am. I would agree with what Steve says. I do think that the people themselves, again, like I said, this is DIY revolution. They are doing it on the ground too. It's not just the armed struggle. It's also the governance structures they're building up. It's also the interethnic dialogues that are happening. They are painful, sometimes very ugly, sometimes very foolish, but they are happening in a way that has never happened before in the history of this country. And this is extremely healthy and important. It's costing us nothing for these things things to happen, but we can support them in some important ways. We did cut off some critical support that I think should come back. I think we also need to think about Thailand with a long border with Burma and our relationship with Thailand. They are our oldest security ally in the
Ambassador,
region.
I'm so sorry. I want to get in a question for
Yes,
Ms.
absolutely.
Karim before my time runs out. So I want to quickly, I'm the top Democrat, the ranking member on the Immigration Subcommittee, and refugee resettlement has long been a bipartisan issue and a tool in our foreign assistance toolbox. And I know that you were resettled in the United States, but due to this current administration's very restrictive immigration policies, it would be almost impossible for you to resettle. Can you talk about your experience resettling and also why it's so important for us to keep that refugee resettlement program strong?
Sorry, I see there's not even a second. So
Hopefully the chairwoman will just indulge your answer.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think, as you can see, I'm one of the many examples, and I also want to acknowledge this. The resettlement program is one of the many solutions that we need. As I did mention, the ultimate goal for us is to return back to home when it is safe to do so. Yeah. And it is not that there's no conditional situation for us right now for refugees in Cox's Bazar to go back. Mm-hmm. However, given the, as you have heard from three of us, given the current situations in the camps in Bangladesh and across the regions in Asia and Pacific countries, it is very important to continue bringing refugees to these countries, a country that care about the human rights, a country that gives identity to refugees, and a country that allows me to call a place home that I was never able to call a home for my entire life, and that actually allows me to continue advocating for millions of people who are left behind. Thank you.
So beautiful. Thank you. We're so fortunate to have you in this country. Appreciate your indulgence.
Of course. Thank you very much. I now recognize the gentleman from Indiana, Representative Sharif, for your questioning.
Thank you, and I thank our subcommittee chairs and ranking members for convening this hearing. This is a subject that matters to all of us in representative government because we have victims of this fast-growing crime in all of our districts. But this is of particular importance to some of us that have large communities of Burmese citizens in our home states and districts. I represent a district in Indiana. Indiana is the home to 42,000 Burmese. We've got about a quarter of the population in the U.S. in our state. And of course, I have victims across my district as well. And this is a crime wave with victims on both ends. We recognize that. We've got victims of scams, and then we have human trafficking victims on the other end of this very sad proposition. And as you noted, this is at its core rooted in money laundering. And so we've got the victims of the drug trade. Mr. Ross noted that annual revenues approach $10 billion. But I think we recognize that this crime wave is so underreported, so difficult to track. Our office thinks that it may be a $15 billion a year problem today and sure to be much larger next year and the following year. And we've got so much work to do to get our arms around this problem. These scam centers represent a national security threat and a humanitarian crisis. Ambassador Currie and Mr. Ross, given our need to better understand what occurs inside these closed-off scam compounds, and considering that there's no formal process for collecting information from freed victims when they gain their freedom, if they gain their freedom, should a structured process be established to gather and analyze their accounts so we can learn from this?
I think that's a wonderful idea, Representative Sharif. I think that one of the things that Thailand especially can do, because most of these people end up in Thailand when they are rescued or flee these scam centers, and Thailand should think about how they can allow, whether it's the UN Office of Drug and Crimes or some other, or the UN Office of the International Organization for Migration, to set up a special office in Mesot and special offices in the Mesai area where most of these people come across the border, to collect information. Right now, it is very ad hoc. I worked on a report for the UN on this a few years ago when it was not as well known of a problem in 2021. And even then, they were struggling to get their arms around it. Now, it's a much bigger problem, much more serious. And you do need an interagency approach here in the United States, as well as at the international level. Thailand is really struggling to deal with it, also because of corruption in the Thai domestic security forces and some of the other, and the reliance on the Thai banking system that these scam centers use and to launder the money as well. So those are things that we really need to work with Thailand on. Thank you.
I would echo Ambassador Currie that I think Thailand is really key, both as a conduit for people being trafficked into Myanmar and for people fleeing from the scam centers or being allowed to leave from them. At present, as I understand it, when people leave from scam centers into Thailand, it is the responsibility of their country to repatriate them to that country. So you have a very ad hoc process of people from dozens of countries, some of whom don't have diplomatic presence in Thailand, trying to figure out how to get their citizens back. In the case of China, the Chinese nationals who are fleeing from the scam centers or leaving the scam centers and going back to China are being taken back on Chinese flights without any investigative process. So it's a black box for the US and for everyone outside of China as to the information that those individuals have. Another key aspect of this is safe houses for those who are leaving or trying to leave from scam centers. And that in and of itself could be a useful information and intelligence gathering source.
If I can add on that point, right now ethnic armed groups from Burma, some of the Karen National Union in particular, are providing safe houses for scam trafficking victims themselves, and doing this because these people end up in their territory and then they help them get repatriated. It is a kind of crazy situation.
I thank you both. My time has expired.
Thank you. I now recognize the gentleman from Texas, Representative Castro, for your lines of questioning.
Thank you, and thank you all for your testimony today. Ambassador Currie, you served as Ambassador at Large for global women's issues in the first Trump administration, and in testimony to the Congress in 2020, you lauded the successes of the Women, Peace, and Security Act of 2017, bipartisan legislation enacted during the first Trump administration to, as you said then, quote, recognize the importance of women's meaningful participation in global security and peace efforts, unquote. And recently, you echoed the same sentiments by warning that women are often invited into peace processes as an afterthought instead of as central political actors. And you played an important role in the initial implementation of this landmark law. And by all accounts, this was an important bipartisan effort during the first Trump administration and also part of your legacy. So can you speak to how important this landmark legislation is, including in the context of Burma?
I'll try to be brief, but this is a topic close to my heart because I came into the Women, Peace, and Security universe, as it is, from Burma. By working with Burmese women in Thailand who had fled the regime in the 1980s and were forming women's organizations to stand up for peace and to get engaged in peace processes and to fight against the military regime through primarily nonviolent means. So I have a long history of working with these women, and they really introduced the whole concept of women, peace, and security to me. So this is very close to my heart. Unfortunately, and when I was at USUN, I would find myself in meetings and pointing out that you cannot solve problems created by men with guns by turning to men with guns for the solution. That is not how any of this is ever going to work. And so I think that we need to be mindful of that, and that there are there continue to be very incredible women like Lucky Karim who are involved in this struggle today and are leading it in ways, including on the battlefield, from the People's Defense Forces and the ethnic armed organizations that are fighting against the regime. There are many strong women on the battlefield, many strong women keeping communities safe and alive inside Burma and on the border. And they deserve our attention and our support. Thank you.
Yeah, and let me just ask a follow-up on that. You know, a critical component of the legislation is the annual report describing implementation of the law. And for the first time, the administration has failed to submit that report to Congress, which was due on October 31st. The bill requires specialized training for U.S. diplomatic and development professionals on the role of women in peace processes. As far as we can tell, no such training has occurred this year. And they've eliminated key positions with implementing this law, including at the Office of Global Women's Issues, which you led during the first Trump administration, and closed down the whole Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations, which housed the Negotiation Support Unit, which supported the role of women in peace processes. Key foreign assistance programs supporting the law have been terminated with no explanation or transparency. There's little to no remaining women, peace, and security expertise at the State Department, USAID, and DHS, 3 of the 4 agencies responsible for implementing the law. For the 4th, the Department of Defense, we understand that they're requesting that Congress repeal parts of the law to eliminate requirements that they conduct training for their officers. So I wanted to ask you, are you at all concerned that the administration has turned its back on this important bipartisan legislation that you had a big part in shaping?
Not just me, but former Congressman Mike Waltz, who was the co-chair of the Women, Peace, and Security Caucus in the Congress when he was here. I think this is a huge mistake, and I have spoken about this. I am working with other conservative women who support the Women, Peace, and Security Act, including women who have served this nation faithfully and well. And it is a foolish and short-sighted thing that is happening. I hope that the administration will recognize that the President Trump did the right thing, signing the Women, Peace, and Security Act in 2017 during his first term and supporting this strongly from the White House, and that it is important not just for our domestic armed forces, but also our position in the world and our security globally. Thank you.
Thank you. And I have one last question, and for Ms. Karim, the answer may have to come for the record because I'm running out of time, but I wanted to ask you, Rohingya advocates and UN investigators have documented how Facebook and other U.S. social media-based platforms, or U.S.-based social media platforms, were used in Burma to spread hate speech and help organize attacks on Rohingya. In your view, have those companies done enough since 2017 to ensure their platforms are not again used to incite violence against your community? We'll take it for the record, because we run.
I will allow about
Sure.
30 seconds to answer. If not, you're free to submit your response in writing. Your choice. Submit in writing. Okay. Thank you. Let me now recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Representative Kane, for your 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to thank our distinguished witnesses for being here today. As we evaluate the ongoing crisis in Burma, we must ensure that the U.S. continues to advocate for justice for the Burmese people. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today regarding opportunities to address the refugee crisis and ensure that religious freedom is protected. Ambassador Currie, a report from the United Nations in June of this year noted that the military in Burma is repressing the entry of aid into the country, noting that humanitarian workers have been physically blocked at checkpoints. What are the most effective means to ensure that aid is received by those like the Rohingya need it the most?
Very briefly, sir, working through cross-border organizations, including with ethnic health systems, ethnic educational systems, and there is a long history of U.S. support for cross-border assistance from Thailand. Also working with India to help get cross-border assistance across the India-Burma border. And we are seeing increased cooperation between India, Bangladesh, and actors in Rakhine State. Again, some of these folks are not people I would choose to cooperate with, but they are facilitating some aid into areas that have long been blocked. The regime consistently blocks any humanitarian assistance from going to areas outside of its control, and it instrumentalizes what humanitarian assistance flows through its channels. And I have long recommended not providing any humanitarian assistance through regime-controlled channels because it only benefits them.
Thank you. Mr. Ross, how do you believe that sanctions and other economic actions in the U.S. government can be used strategically to pressure the junta to protect the rights of all Burmese civilians?
Thank you for the question. As I said earlier, I think that there has been an incremental approach to sanctions over the last almost 5 years, and I'd say a much heavier focus on the imposition of sanctions than the enforcement or coordination of sanctions. So certainly, I think there is some additional benefit from continuing to look at actors that are benefiting from the drugs trade, from scam centers, that are supplying weapons to the military, and looking at those actors. But there's also a lot on the table that is ripe for further enforcement and coordination, interagency, and also with other allies and partners.
And as a follow-up, Burma has increasingly aligned itself militarily with China and with Russia through armaments and training, respectively. How do you believe that these Burmese alliances will impact America's allies in the region?
Sure. Yeah, I think that the arms flows from China and Russia, and to a lesser extent others in the region, have an impact on stability within Myanmar and then have a spillover effect elsewhere in the region. So the outflow of refugees, the impact of disease that is not confined to borders, all of those things are follow-on impacts of the armed support that's being provided by China and Russia to the regime that enables it to continue to wage war against the Myanmar people.
Thank you. Ms. Karim, can you please share what actions from the United States and other members of the international community have been the most impactful in addressing the plight of the Rohingya in Burma?
Thank you for the question. The international community members and the United States have done a lot already. I think I would also want to mention for the last 2.5 years, because of the competing priorities in the world, we've lost the attention, the level of support and attention from the international community members, and I would like to call on them to continue engaging on these issues and to work to make sure that the issues are being addressed timely. The United States could do much more, including providing funding to the much needed programs on the ground, but also working with the host government, including Bangladesh, to allow refugees to work within the camps. These are for the short and medium-term solution that we need, but for the long term, to facilitate the sustainable, dignified, and safe return for those who are still in the camps back to our homeland in Burma. Thank you.
Thank you, and I yield back my time.
Thank you. Let me now recognize the gentleman from Texas, Representative Self.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to explore, you have painted a picture of basically Burma being fractured. I want to explore the idea that are they becoming a client state of China? For a couple of reasons, the Belt and Road initiatives and the Kyaukphyu Deepwater Port and the China-Myanmar pipelines, because it looks to me as though this gives a strategic advantage to China by allowing them to bypass the Strait of Malacca. So first of all, let's start with that. Ambassador?
Yes, sir. China sees Burma as their gateway to the Indian Ocean. This has been a plan that has been in place for some time now. Kyaukphyu is existential for China. That port and those pipelines are critical infrastructure for them. They will do whatever it takes to preserve those, and they are doing whatever it takes right now to preserve their access and for precisely the reasons that you state. The biggest threat to that right now is the ascent of the Arakan army in Rakhine State, where Jogpu is located. And so one of the reasons that the Chinese have become more of a decisive enabler of the regime's war and are trying to shut down some of the problems in other areas of the country are to allow the Burma army to target its resources on the areas that are most critical to China. And right now you have Chinese armed forces, police and armed forces operating inside Burmese territory to protect critical infrastructure for the Chinese. This is unprecedented in the history of Burma. As Steve said, as Mr. Ross said, the Burma military hates the Chinese because they have a long history of enmity. But the fact that Min Aung Hlaing has allowed China to become so influential in that country is a sign of his desperation and weakness, but China is fully taking advantage of all of it. And this, if you go back to 2010, and 2007 and 2008, when the regime started to experiment with openness, the reason they did that was because they were becoming too dependent on China for their own comfort. That was a key driver of the 2010 elections and the openness and the freeing of Aung San Suu Kyi and all of those things that happened after 2007. They are now so desperate to hold on to power, Min Aung Hlaing specifically, but also the senior people around him, that they have allowed China to come in a way that they have never done before.
Mr. Ross?
Yeah, I agree with Ambassador Currie. I think that what China has pursued in Myanmar is enough stability such that it can advance its geostrategic and economic interests through these mega infrastructure projects, but not so much stability that it can't wield leverage over all stakeholders involved. And right now it has a lot of leverage over both the regime and of the ethnic armed groups that are operating on the China-Myanmar border. It's positioned itself extremely well and at great risk to U.S. interests.
So I see that South Korea, India, Myanmar, of course, and China are all involved in the pipeline project. Is there a leverage there by the U.S. on particularly the South Korea and India companies? Ambassador?
Yes, sir. POSCO, which is the South Korean company, we have quietly tried to shut this down and have engaged with the South Koreans about this problem and tried to get them to withdraw. I think they've reduced their footprint in Burma substantially since 2021, but they continue to provide critical support. Other countries that are our allies in the region also continue to provide participate in the legal economy in Burma and provide meaningful support to the regime through that. India is a major one. India has tried to play the China game of playing both sides. They're just not flexible enough to do it and don't have the strategic depth that China does to pull it off. But the answer there right now, the short term, is to encourage India to try to diversify their relationships and not be solely dependent on the regime for engaging in Burma and protecting their security interests, which they do have genuine security problems coming out of Burma. Thank you.
It looks to me like if we could put pressure on the South Korea and India, for instance, because they provide legitimate cover for China in Burma in the pipeline. So if we could remove all other international presence, I think it would make it more directly apparent that this is a strategic defense move. With that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you very much. We have a few more minutes, so I would like to go for a second round of questioning, and I would like to continue on the conversation that my ranking member, Ami Bera, raised regarding the ASEAN's role. ASEAN's 5-point consensus that calls for ceasing violence, facilitating dialogue, and providing humanitarian aid remains the bloc's official position, but we've seen little progress on implementation. So is the 5-point consensus still a viable framework, or has it become an obstacle to more concrete action? Can you address that, Ambassador Currie, and maybe Mr. Ross, you can address that too.
The short answer is no, it's not viable. It wasn't viable from the minute the ink was dry on it because Burma basically violated, the Burma army basically violated it from the get-go. And yes, it does need to be replaced with something else. I think that there is a big divide within ASEAN. The countries that can be influenced by China, such as Cambodia and Laos, continue to block a consensus. Other countries that are downstream of problems, Thailand and Malaysia particularly, have been a little waffly, but have tried to do more. But ASEAN itself is quite divided. We have allowed ourselves to be held captive by the 5-point consensus and allowed it to be the driver of U.S. policy on Burma, which is a mistake. We should have our own policy. We should not be downstream of ASEAN's dysfunction. But we should work with ASEAN to try to strengthen their hand in this regard and create pathways for at least individual members of ASEAN that want to do something different to do that and provide diplomatic engagement with them in ways, whether it's with Indonesia and Malaysia or rethinking our approach to Thailand on Burma and our approach to Thailand overall, which enables this kind of squishy policy that doesn't, it's really more of a non-policy than a policy. Thank you.
Can you supplement Ambassador's response with, maybe you can talk about how the U.S. can be more effective in providing the regional response, and I appreciate the Ambassador's response.
Sure. And just to add that the 5-point consensus, I would say, is the least common denominator. It's the baseline, the foundation for what everyone could agree to. Although since it was agreed, I think it has not been effectively implemented, and I think ASEAN admits that. One of the challenges, I think, is the turnover in ASEAN focus on Myanmar. Every year, there's a new special envoy that's appointed by the ASEAN chair. The Philippines, the incoming chair, has just appointed its new special envoy, and that prevents a coherent and strategic and long-term approach that's needed to a challenge that is not going to be resolved in a one-year timeline. So I think for the U.S., it's encouraging ASEAN to take on this in a way that recognizes the long-term nature of the challenge, and that ASEAN needs significant support as a bloc to be able to effectively address the challenges that Myanmar is facing and the impacts that it's having on the region. I would just conclude by saying that I agree with Ambassador Currie on the divides within ASEAN, particularly between mainland and maritime Southeast Asia, and the structural impediments of ASEAN's principles of consensus and non-interference to them playing a more significant and more constructive role in realizing a political solution.
Thank you. I will turn it over to Ranking Member Bera for your questions.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Ambassador Currie, you touched on something that, in terms of the tenuous relationship between the junta and China, are there, again, the junta does seem to align with China right now for survival's sake, but that's also, again, a tenuous relationship. Are there things that we should be thinking about strategically in terms of either exploiting that that uncomfortable relationship, or, and we can also follow that up offline as well, but.
Well, one of the things that we could do that, and I'll go back to Chairwoman Kim here, we have lost one of our best tools for highlighting how problematic this is for the Burmese people by shutting down Radio Free Asia and its broadcasts into Burma. One of the main sources of information we were getting about the predations of Chinese industry and Chinese state-owned businesses and problems arising out of these pipelines and these port projects, whether it's trafficking or other huge problems that have come about as a result of these Chinese investments in Burma, is from Radio Free Asia, also from human rights organizations that report on the situation in Shan State or in Kachin State, where mining projects by Chinese state-owned enterprises and Chinese companies are having a devastating effect on the local communities. Reporting on those things comes from Radio Free Asia and from human rights organizations operating on the ground, often with U.S. government support. Very quiet, very small, but important support. And so cutting off that nexus has blinded us and also taken away a major vector of information to the Burmese people about the problems of this collaboration between the junta and the People's Republic of China.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, it is one of the best vehicles we have in terms of making sure the people of Burma understand what's happening in this relationship. Let me just ask another quick follow-up question. You talked about one of the challenges within ASEAN is as leadership turns over, new envoys, et cetera. You know, at the start of this conflict, you know, I think there was probably a hope that it wouldn't be a long-term conflict. I think we have to think about it differently now that, you know, this isn't going to wrap up in a year. And what does a longer-term engagement, you know, whether, you know, we have our special envoy, whether it's through the United Nations and ASEAN, folks that can work on this over a longer period, and then also can imagine what happens post-conflict. Would that be the right way for us to start thinking about this, not as a short-term thing, but a long-term, end the conflict, find the ceasefire? What's the path forward?
I can start on that. Thanks for the question. I would say that since the coup in 2021, we've had a bit of a piecemeal approach in terms of U.S. strategy, and I think that a really thorough look at what U.S. policy and strategy towards Myanmar should be is necessary. I understand there's a policy review underway in the State Department, but that is something that I think has been lacking for the last 4+ years and would serve U.S. interests well to be able to develop something that is more coherent and strategic over the medium term.
And we should do that in concert with our ASEAN partners.
Yes.
Great. With that,
And if I can add, sir, Burma policy has been under review since the administration came in, and during the Biden administration, it was completely adrift. You were being too diplomatic, I think, Mr. Ross, in calling it incoherent. It was adrift. We co-opted to the least common denominator of the 5-point consensus and took some piecemeal actions. I think that there are things we can do, low-cost solutions. We do need to, the review is important, but it's not going to matter if we've lost all of the tools or eviscerated all of the tools we have to actually implement a coherent policy. And then I would also add that, again, I talk about Thailand a lot when it comes to Burma because for decades now, for some time now, we have not had a Burma policy to speak of. We have a Thailand policy that consists of doing whatever it will keep us in good standing with the most regressive elements of the Thai leadership. Thailand is changing. We need to rethink our strategy on Thailand and then think about our strategy on Burma in a partnership with that strategy on Thailand and how those two things lock together for success. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Very good point. Chairman Huizenga, for your questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm going to make a quick statement. I'm going to give you each about 1.5 minutes, okay? So I'm not trying to be rude, trying to make sure I hit it all. I want to hear from all of you. I couldn't agree with you more, Ambassador Currie. We need a coherent policy. We got virtually nothing out of the last administration when we would push them, whether it was Blinken in front of us or whether it was the administration. I'm pushing to make sure this administration doesn't make the same mistake. And so they've got an opportunity. My message to them is seize it. We need to do that. Ms. Karim, I would like to know from you, we've got a number of these initiatives that have been going on, but I'm curious to know from your view on the ground, how is the interim caretaker government's treatment, the current Bangladesh government, how has their treatment of the Rohingya refugees differed from the previous governments?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think, well, I also want to make it clear that Bangladesh itself is going through a huge political transition, given that the Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina have been kicked out of the country and the new interim government. But there, to be frankly, we haven't seen any much larger policy change yet since the interim government in terms of refugee response in the camps. But there has been lots of improvement, including transportation, the very basic grassroots level improvement in the camps. But we haven't seen much policy change yet from the capital. So I think in terms of responding, Bangladesh itself, what we would like to see from them and have not seen yet, would be allowing refugees to work in the camps. And I would echo Ambassador Currie on this. Refugees want to work, of course, and it's not only
Be self-sufficient.
in the camps to help their
more
families.
self-sufficient.
Yeah, correct. And it will also prepare refugees for their return back to home, so we don't have to keep coming back and forth to Bangladesh over and over again.
Great. I'm going to stick to my own admonition here. Got 3 minutes. Mr. Ross, the October military junta raid on online scam centers in non-junta controlled eastern Burma had seized Starlink satellite devices. What does the operation reveal about the junta's relationship with scam operations? Is it genuinely cracking down or selectively targeting operations outside its control while protecting those that benefit the regime?
Thank you for the question. I think this is purely a performative act. The Myanmar military and the border guard forces that control the areas where the scam centers are operated from are very closely intertwined, and there are strong personal linkages, financial linkages that extend quite deep on both sides. So the intent behind this, I think we need to link it to the elections. It's an effort by the military to and its allies in the border guard forces to give the impression that it is cracking down ahead of elections, but without the substance behind it to actually demonstrate that it is cracking down. There's a new crackdown that's been happening this week against one of the other scam centers called Shui Koko, and information in the public domain suggests that several thousand people were notified in advance that this crackdown would happen. So the leadership
Very
was able
effective way to do a raid, right?
Leadership was able to flee, and perhaps evidence, materials, other things that would be of interest or squirreled away to other scam centers that continue to operate. So it's a purely performative measure. Again, the areas where these scams are taking place are intricately linked to the military itself. And operate with the acquiescence of the military.
Okay, Ambassador Currie, do you agree? And what can we do to encourage or actually verify that those crackdowns are effective?
Well, there's not a lot we can do inside Burma to do that because the regime is, as I 100% agree with everything that Mr. Ross said about the performative nature of these. They do this with drug seizures too, where it's kabuki theater. They warn the kingpins in advance and the important people are gone. There's always a scapegoat of people who are arrested and drugs that are burned and in this case, things that are seized, but it's always very performative. I think that, again, money, it's about money. We've got to find better ways to cut off the flows of financing in and out of these regimes and in and out of these scam centers. That's the key. Treasury needs to have a dedicated set of resources to this problem and really put some people on it and do it immediately. It's costing Americans money and lives. And it's enabling a whole ecosystem of criminality that's endangering us, our allies, and the future of Burma. Thank you.
With that, Madam Chair, I yield back and thank you very much again to all three of you.
With that, I also want to thank all of our witnesses for joining us today and providing wonderful, wonderful, and very powerful testimony. I know the intent of our hearing was to eliminate the prominent source of regional instability and talk about ways that we can come up with some foreign policy opportunity for the United States. Through the Q&A sessions, I think we were able to glean a lot of those opportunities. So we're going to continue to have this conversation with you. And I want to thank all of the members that participated in this session. And the members of the subcommittee may have some additional questions for you. So we'll ask you to respond to those in writing. So pursuant to our committee rules, all members may have 5 days to submit statements, questions, extraneous materials for the records, subject to the length limitations. So without objection, this committee now stands adjourned.